Okay, hello and welcome to this session entitled He's a Dedicated Follower of Fashion. I'm Rick Edwards. I am a man, I wear clothes, and therefore excellent choice of host for this session. I'm delighted to be joined by not one but four dedicated followers of fashion, all of them immaculately turned out. Firstly, Harris Elliott, creative director who co-curated the fantastic The Return of the Rudeboy exhibition at Somerset House last year. I think maybe a little round of applause just to make people sort of feel, yeah, I mean, why not? Doesn't hurt, does it? Adnan Ansari, who is the founder and creative director of Riwayat, who are organisers of the Pakistan Fashion Week London. Again, you'll get the grammar of this eventually. It's genuinely not hard. Then Ekow Eshun, a writer and broadcaster who explores contemporary culture. Finally. And also Terry Betts, who's head of business development at Thread and formerly of Selfridges, Mr. Porter and Harvey Nichols. So, what we're going to be talking about is are a man's clothes important? What do they tell us, if anything? People have certainly thought so for a long time. Famously in Hamlet, Polonius says, and I'm obviously going to read this quote because I'm not an actor and I haven't memorised it, and honestly I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't Googled it. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. And that's one of the things we'll be discussing today, apparel proclaiming the man. So clothes hinting at something about the character of the wearer. So in turn, it'd be great if each of you could just tell us a bit about yourselves, your relationship with your clothes and other people's clothes, and any thoughts on this idea of clothes making the man. Starting with you, please, Harris.
Hi, everyone. I work in London and travel all over the world. I'm working with different fashion brands, musicians, and fashion houses. There's a few images from my project Return of the Rudeboy, which I co-curated with Dean Chalkley. It was an exhibition that was at Somerset House last summer, 2014, which ran for 10 weeks. And it was a documentation of young men and some women who embody and who epitomise what it means to be a rude boy in the 21st century. Rude boy, for those of you who don't know, takes reference from a movement and a lifestyle and a series of people that emanated from Kingston, Jamaica in the late 1950s. Then when said Jamaicans moved to the UK, rude boy style was embraced and adopted by youth cultures that were here, and then it then became reappropriated again in the late 70s and the early 80s by the two-tone movement. So we were making a documentation of what it means to be rude in terms of a DIY aesthetic, in terms of who people are and what it means to make an alternative choice to do other than what the mainstream media tells you who you should be and how you should dress. So it's not a trend, it's not something that can be dictated to, it's something that's internal, but something that should be applauded, being yourself and defining who you are, and your wardrobe or your sense of dress being really integral to that.
Okay. Adnan?
Good evening, all of you.
Evening works.
It's an afternoon. I have organized this Pakistan Fashion Week for the last 4 years. My aim is to project the Pakistani culture in West, which is a different concept, which you have never seen. We don't show anything which is traditionally what you have seen here for decades. It's completely different. It's very fusion, it's very contemporary, it's very creative. My object with the fashion, and it's just one of the jobs that I do, it's just not that we organize Pakistan Fashion Week. I'm an art director and a production designer for film, theatre and television. I organize cultural events and, related to art and culture things. About the clothing, I'll come to the subject that, do men make, the clothes make the men? Definitely, because my job is observing things and this and that, to show around and to see things. Definitely, I can tell people through their clothing, what the profession, or what they do, what they look like. Everything these days is fashion. Even your lifestyle is fashion, everything is fashion. And this is what we project from Pakistan as well. It's a lifestyle thing, it's about fashion, it's about clothing. Anything you name it, it's fashion, you know. Whether it's your mobile, whether it's accessories, whether it's your, your lifestyle, what you carry and everything. So through my platform, what I do is I project the modern image of Pakistan in the West, and tell who we are actually. It's not just the fashion; it's complete fashion. It's the music, it's art and culture and everything.
Okay, Ekow.
I'm sort of interested, I guess, in how men and their relationship to fashion and to personal style has changed over the decades. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time looking at magazines. I used to, I guess as a teenager, I used to sort of obsessively read the Face magazine.
Yeah.
And I used to, look at that and ID and so on and so on. And when I got a bit older, I started working for the Face magazine. And then I started editing my own magazine, Arena, which is a men's style magazine. And all of that, kind of throughout that period, I was sort of fascinated by the different ways that men have, sort of cultivated a relationship with fashion. Because if you can remember back to the 70s, there's this kind of such a reluctance to own the idea of what it meant to not even necessarily look good, but what it meant to spend time on appearance and grooming and all of these things. Obviously, we've seen a big change in that. We've seen a big change in men's grooming and so on. But I'm kind of interested, I guess, from my own personal level, as much as anything else, I'm interested in how we as men try and decide what clothes genuinely do make us. And it's really interesting that you can tell a story about change in Britain, basically, from the different ways that men have changed, that men have adopted different looks. The beard, for instance, is like a really interesting thing in terms of, how men are trying to kind of look to heritage, look to a certain idea of masculinity, look to a certain idea of grown-upness. And I guess I'm just personally interested in all these things. I remember when I was when I was a kid again, one of my ambitions, and actually this is terrible, but one of my ambitions when I was a kid was to grow up to be elegant. I sort of loved the idea of finding a way that seemed or finding a way of dress that seemed appropriate. I don't think I've got there because I'm kind of interested, I guess, in the sort of internal and external states of being, in how the clothes you wear aren't just a kind of uniform, aren't just a costume, but in some senses, for them to be successful as clothes, they also need to express a kind of inner state. They need to express your psychological state in some way, and that's always changing anyway. So I guess two things. I'm interested in sociologically how things have changed in Britain and how men have expressed themselves in different ways through their clothes. And I'm interested on a very personal level for myself in figuring out what it actually does mean to dress well in ways that feel comfortable and good and assertive of your own inner state.
And I guess just very quickly, by a show of hands, is Ekow elegant? Yes?
No, it's kind of 50-50.
And then no, Ekow isn't elegant?
Oh, no. Okay,
okay, so a lot of people abstaining,
fine.
but that's okay, Ekow. And Terry?
So I think today's topic for me is similar 2 points. As someone that I guess has had a responsibility of some sort in the industry in putting clothes out there that men can actually buy, I think the 2 points for me is, do we accept that, to look good and wear clothes that fit well give you an advantage in society? And if they do, then for me, in my role, is kind of how I present those clothes and make them easy for men to access so they feel better and feel more confident. So, my background's been kind of, if we go way back, was Petticoat Lane and selling shoes on the market stalls, which, apologies if you bought any of them, because you certainly wouldn't be stylish. But then I got a break and I was at Harvey Nichols, and that was like my first taste of a fairly big platform. To bring brands on and work with some amazing designers and touch on that creativity that's involved in that process. I then went on to work at Mr. Porter, which was a global platform, and was interesting because it was less fashion and more style. So we really started to dig a little bit deeper into kind of, what it meant to dress like a man and all the questions that throws up and how narrow you go with that and how wide and accepting you can be around that kind of concept. And then I was director of Selfridges, which again was a kind of big, exciting, fast, central kind of, again, a global platform for bringing through new designers and much more about maybe the way that men are going to dress and we're going to bring that through and launching newness and being at the forefront. And then recently I've joined a startup called Thread, which is, I guess in terms of the business of fashion, probably one of the most exciting areas, and it's about fashion and technology. So it's kind of, how, our concept is that we take real life stylists, combine them with intelligent algorithms, and which sounds sexy, doesn't it? Not very fashion. But what we're really trying to do is provide a solution. And I guess, I think fashion's quite intimidating and terrifying for a lot of guys. And I think if we can take all of this knowledge and help them access it, and the idea is that, what we're doing is taking millions of overwhelming fashion data and pieces and making it easy for men to find what they want, then everyone should be able inherently to dress a little better and feel more confident. And all of those, as you touched on, all of those kind of, maybe social benefits of feeling better about yourself. And I think it's, I think that's interesting to find that in fashion, which, by the nature of its business, can be frivolous.
There's a sort of interesting paradox that I've observed in that I feel that this probably applies equally to men and women. There's an eagerness to stand out in the way that you dress, but there's also a sort of eagerness to belong to a tribe, to sort of use your clothes as a way of signifying these are the kind of people that I associate with. What do you make of that paradox? Because it's a strange thing, sort of fighting against homogeneity, but then also being part of it. Harris?
I think we're in an interesting time in the sense that style tribes which I grew up with or grew up either admiring, whether that be mods, whether that be punks, skinheads, or whoever it was, people could be defined musically and stylistically at the same time because you would go to the same clubs, the same raves, the same places. And we're now in a time where people can listen to all different kinds of music because of the access that they have. So therefore, that way of belonging isn't necessarily so easy to define. So you can find different types of people that might be into the same music or hang out together, but that kind of uniformness of being that tribe of being together isn't the same. So it's kind of, for me, it's just kind of seeing what will happen next. So how to stand out. Some people will naturally stand out because they're not like any of their friends, and it's okay to be like that. So it was the pluses and the minuses of being part of the tribe is kind of what I'm kind of like aware of and looking at now.
I'm sort of fascinated. So one of the things I think about, men's fashion, like men have prided themselves on the sort of distinction of kind of minimal difference for a long time. There's this kind of whole one-upmanship in kind of men's fashion, which is that, I can tell you the provenance of my jacket or my shoes, and shoes are made in Northampton, but and the last is this and that, and so heritage, basically men's fashion by and large tends to be the same. A pair of shoes, some trousers, jacket, and so on. So actually, what you end up with is this kind of pride of small difference. It's like things are slightly better cut. The label is has a slightly better provenance to it, and so on. So actually, you're right. There's always this kind of tension between standing out and being part of a group. But even part of the group, really, the thing is to have this kind of secret level of one-upmanship that isn't really perceived outside that, but within inside the group puts you on a slightly notch higher up and inside the kind of hierarchy.
But I think what's interesting about that, whenever we're looking at trends and styles, is that you inevitably look at male style icons. It's a big reference in menswear, and it's always the same ones. You look at the leather jacket and it's Brando, and you look at a grey sweatshirt and it's Steve McQueen in the Clore in The Great Escape, and it's JFK as the preppy. Who are the modern day style icons that people can start to reference? Because I think even though Cary Grant in a tux is another one that gets used, and it's always looking back. So I think even that lineage.
But you know what?
Who's breaking out of that?
I actually think there's something really interesting going on at the moment, which is you're right. There's this complete archetypal sort of lineage. But actually, one of the things I'm quite interested in the sort of Rick Owens influence right now. You know, like, it's really interesting seeing some more directional stuff coming through in terms of Rick Owens, in terms of Givenchy, in terms of a few other things. Where actually, right now, I think you see more young men on the streets dressed more directionally in terms of, you know, kind of very skinny, whatever you call that look, goth ninja or whatever you call it, you know, this kind of look that's actually, that in fact jumps outside that sort of silhouette and that kind of style, which is, you know, very classic, but also it's fairly conservative, because it goes back, you know, go back to the 50s and go back to the 30s. So what I find quite interesting is just the last couple of years, you're actually starting to see a shift in ways that would have been impossible to predict like 5 years ago, and it's the only time I've seen that in a long time, really.
And I think you're right, and actually, commercially, it's a business, which is, exactly, globally.
Do you think that's partly coming out of the fact that we have fast fashion and we have those brands like Topman who are able to react to trends so quickly and then put them out there at an affordable price point so more people can, fine, they might not be able to afford the Rick Owens, but they can afford a very similar garment and put it together for a reasonable price?
I think fashion has evolved so much these days, you know. It has been accessible to everyone. We have more brands, more variety now. You know, we are talking about being standing out. You know, you don't have to belong to I don't feel like you have to belong to a certain group or something to stand out. It's just your own style. How do you stand out? How do you want to, you know? But definitely, you know, you have so much of things to offer now, and there's so much of competition. There's the way that things have changed now, the things have evolved now. So, you know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm quite interested in, I think yes, you're right about fast fashion. I think yes, things are evolving. I think one of the other things, like, can I digress just for one moment? So I was
just one moment, Ekow.
I was chairing this, or I was judging this kind of high school student kind of public speech kind of thing the other day, and all these kind of young people had to stand up and kind of do a little speech, and the sort of topic was, don't judge a book by its cover. And they all talked about gender. They all talked about kind of personal identity. They all talked about these different ways that they're approaching their own sense of self. In part because they're like 17 years old and kind of thinking about the world. But one of the things that struck me about that was that I think there's a much wider ongoing debate about what gender looks like, what masculinity looks like, you know, kind of what gender neutral roles look like, or what transgender roles and identities and body images looks like. And I know I'm sort of casting wide that way, but I think, just to sort of follow on my last part, I'm kind of interested in how I think we might be possibly the last set of men who think exclusively about fashion and style in terms of that lineage that you've been talking about, Terry. Perhaps when you see your Kanyes or your A$AP Rockies wearing Rick Owens and so on, it starts to open up a different way, not just to think about dress, but also to think about masculinity to some extent. Also to open up a kind of space to think about, how clothes and manliness can be an open thing rather than the kind of thing which often tends to be quite a closed set of avenues.
There's a designer as well that I met recently called Astrid Anderson, and she's doing very well, and people like A$AP Rocky are wearing her Clore, and she won't really talk about this like unisex clothing, but she also won't talk about designing for men. She's like, I design clothes, anyone can wear them. She says unisex is not a very sexy term, which is true, but she's very much of your opinion. I think that actually we're evolving to a point where people won't see those divides so clearly, and they might start looking for very different kinds of references. Would you agree with that, Terry?
Well, I think part of that as well. I mean, Astrid's a great talent. She's one of the most exciting designers coming out of the UK now. And there's Astrid and Nazir and and Bobby, and there's a few people coming up through London collections that are really exciting. But I think what's interesting when you talk to them is that because of when they were born, they're looking back and their influences are sportswear. They're 90s sportswear, and it's hip hop and it's music and that subculture. Whereas if you go back a generation, it was daring for Armani to deconstruct the suit. And that was his way to play around with the fashion codes. And, if you go back a generation before that, every single photo I saw my granddad in, he had a three-piece suit. Didn't matter if he was at work or play or on the beach. It was that was his uniform. And so, I think as we go on, the references that those guys have grown up with and they're looking at and what they're listening to is fresh. And it's, and that interpretation's coming through. So I think as those boundaries blur, we should see, even more and more exciting stuff come through.
For me, it's also partly the fact, going back to the music element, that it's almost like a reclaim the streets, in the sense that big fashion houses and big brands would always dictate what everyone had to wear, whether it's through the likes of whatever magazines it was. All the style magazines that we grew up on, ID, Face, now it's Pop, it was Sky, it was... there came a point where advertisers used to dictate what you would have to buy, and then also what images would be in the magazine. So it's not this democratic position where we look in a magazine and think it's the styling's all quite free, that advertising brands would say we'll pay an X amount of money, and therefore you have to use our brand in your fashion shoots. Whereas now we're at a time where, because you get someone like ASAP, or whether it is Kanye, or whoever it might be, they have such huge followings, the brands have had to switch their thinking. Because for me as a stylist, for years, if you wanted to get any clothes for any kind of hip-hop type artist, brands would never want to court that at all. Whereas because they have such huge followings, the brands financially, I feel, have had to start embracing it, because otherwise they're turning down huge swathes of money.
There's really fascinating examples of that as well. So I remember speaking to the guys at Stone Island, and Stone Island in this country have quite a specific association with football crews,
football captains,
and the terraces, and they're constantly kind of battling against that and actually doing a pretty good job, I think. But one of the biggest things that happened to them was Drake started wearing their stuff, and Drake puts pictures of himself wearing it on Instagram, and it gets way more exposure than they could ever dream of buying, and then puts it in a totally different place. And brands absolutely recognise that, just the power that these individuals have. It's totally changing the way they think about how to market, really.
But I think Stone Island's an interesting example, because I remember being really young and going to the football, and a lot of that was driven by guys that would go and follow the football abroad in Europe. And so, they'd come back with Italian sportswear. I remember the first time I wore Sergio Tacchini. Right? I mean, that was like a moment, and that was that was a big name, and the first time you bought something that you saw something that, whether it was Kangol or something from New York, and that was kind of as far as your international influences could go in the kind of mid-'80s, early '90s. Whereas now, as a buyer and someone selecting product, we're going to Japan, which you'd never dreamt of going 20 years ago, and seeing those influences, Korea, all the stuff coming out of LA, stuff coming out of Scandinavia, all of that's a huge melting pot now. So I think the style that men can access is just so diverse, and I think that's interesting. It becomes less about the brand and more about the kind of aesthetic.
I think one thing, it's interesting seeing basically two generations, waves of social media influenced men's fashion. So you go back a few years and the whole kind of heritage, let me wear a bit of a suit and a blazer, let me reference that lineage that you were talking about, Terry. That was such a kind of big menswear trend, and it was such a notion also of kind of men, kind of fairly fixed idea of what a man could be and what a man should look like, and if you're at Mr. Porter, how you can sell that idea and so on. And I think, what's happening right now, or what we're starting to see happen right now, is a sort of second wave of that, where actually things are much more diffuse than that. And it's kind of interesting watching something kind of percolate onto the streets that way.
Well, you have brands like KTZ, who their whole being from the beginning was mixing music and fashion when they started. And so they've been able to start developing their own culture. And for me, what a lot of brands miss is actually understanding that they actually need culture. It's not about selling trends. The audience aren't stupid, and for years, brands would have this ethos that actually we can market to you and dictate to you and tell you exactly what you need to wear. Now, because we've got the access to information, it's the case that actually you can't treat us like we're stupid anymore, and we do have a choice. And so when you get brands like KTZ who start defining their own trends, their own ways of working and bucking the trend, doing their own fashion style, their own fashion shows and shoots in their own unique way. And then you have the musicians which buy into that. You then find a whole new way of things working, and they have a hugely successful business and are not a major fashion house. And it's just kind of a really exciting time that these trends will change, because people can start garnering their own tribes around them, and actually that can be what is the driving force, and it not be about whether you've got a certain fashion house in Paris or Milan.
I think something I kind of got to ask you already, given that we're sitting on a fashion panel. How long did you all take to pick your outfits? I was worried about it. I went quite simple in the end. But I suppose my point is, are men spending, or anyone spending too much time thinking about what they're wearing? I spend a lot of time, a lot of my life is spent looking through my wardrobe and wondering what to wear.
I think men do take a lot of time these days taking care of themselves. As I said, things have changed a lot. Modern things are access to everyone through social media or through mobile phones, everything. Today, men is more modern. They have a huge color of palette to play around with them. I always say one line: fashion has no boundaries. Whether it's cut, whether it's color. I'm wearing red, I'm wearing white, I'm wearing all sort of colors. I wear all color palettes on the face of earth. So men today, especially, it doesn't have a tribe, I don't believe. It doesn't have an age limit. They just wear whatever it suits them, whatever they like it. Fashion is something that you can buy, and style is something that you have. To stand out in a crowd, you don't have to stand out as an odd one out, or wear something which is something really outstanding or doesn't look weird. You can wear something nice and not the brands or anything. I believe men do take a lot of time these days. I took 2 days to decide what to wear today.
Yeah, it was well worth it, Adnan. You're fine. I get. Is there something to be said though for taking it? And I think this is a myth about Einstein. I don't think Einstein did have loads of the same suit, but the sort of legend is he had the same suit, so he never had to worry about what he was going to wear, so he could think about quantum gravity or whatever. And then you look at someone like, Steve Jobs did it, Zuckerberg does it. Would we all be better off just saying, right, this is my look, I wear this every day, and everyone knows me by that?
I think, just to touch on your last question, I think it's interesting because even as someone that works in fashion, I don't want to spend time choosing my outfit. Like, there is much more valuable things to me than doing it. So I totally get that approach. I think probably what most guys probably want is to work out their personal style quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it takes guys, not as a criticism, but some guys never necessarily find that because they're jumping from trend to trend. But I think if you can identify that and that works for you, that's something, I'm not saying it should be a black roll neck and a pair of dad jeans and a pair of trainers, but Steve Jobs had other talents, right? So, but I think if you can find that individual style and stick to it, I think that's totally fine. I don't think you need to be trendy, you don't need to be fashion and that's style. But I think you need, most people need help with that. That's it's an intimidating industry to work at. Are you following Beckham and his Red Wings and APC jeans and Bellstaff jackets, or are you following Kanye and sportswear? And where do you, who are you and what are you trying to kind of convey? And I think that's a huge challenge, I think, because there's so much information out there.
What are you trying to convey, Ekow?
I have about 5 minutes a day because I've got 2 small children who kind of get into your space. But basically, look, I don't think I'm alone in saying that, as a man, I probably want variation on the same look and the same clothes and with minor differences in cut and brand for the last 30 years or something. The thing about men's fashion is that it both has capacity to move quite fast and dodge around, but it also is about turning over the same things. Red Wings come and go. They're sort of great boots and they'll come and go and they get rediscovered. And various things, various elements of the male wardrobe, unless you're talking about those radical Rick Owens type shifts, which happen much less, various elements of the male wardrobe recur. So actually, a lot of the time, the search is to find the better cut version, to find the higher quality knitwear, to find the better brand of shoe. It's not necessarily to dismantle the whole wardrobe. I have a well, actually, in fact, yes, I just realised I'm talking entirely about my own life. In that, my lifelong search is to find the kind of right gauge of jumper, or, which tends to be smedley, or,
Very exciting life.
Yeah, well, I know. Look, that's what I'm saying. It's quite sad but in a way, it's also a search to kind of refine a thing. It's a search to find always the better version, to find a better colour of a blue jacket, and arguably that makes me kind of dull and so on. But also, I'm kind of interested in how that search doesn't end. I'm interested in the many variations you can have on minor kind of shifts and so on.
And do you think that we're right to, because what I'm certainly guilty of is I make judgments about other men by what they're wearing. Should I be doing that? I'm looking at you, Harris. Not judgmentally.
Thank you. I just think it's part of human nature, and because of the way that we consume media, and we're always told to look at things a certain way, and image is so important, and the whole selfie culture, we can't stop but looking at ourselves and looking at one another and judging other people. No, I don't think we need to do that, because it doesn't actually benefit in any way.
It's not even necessarily judging, it's like learning. Again, bring it back to the men thing. Men are kind of interesting because everyone's slightly bashful as a man of spending too much time looking at other men. Heterosexual men, I think.
I spent my career doing it.
Have some concern about that and so on. But actually, I spend a great deal of time looking at how other men are dressed. Because I'm really interested in it to begin with, and I'm interested if they've got something that I either haven't seen or would like to have for myself, or have variations on that. I spend a lot of time in Shoreditch, so you walk up and down Redchurch Street and all of those streets. You learn a lot, in kind of really interesting ways.
Curiosity is the trait, right?
Yeah.
An outfit of a man can tell you a lot of things about him. His shoe, his watch, his hygiene, it tells you about his hygiene. It can tell you about his taste. It can tell you about his lifestyle. Every single garment or every single accessories say a lot of stories about a person. It's just not men. It can be anyone.
So it's kind of interesting that as well, because all of those cues can presumably be manipulated. Like, you could pick stuff that actually it doesn't reflect your personality, but wear it and convince people of something else, which is an interesting thing to play with, isn't it?
I think you can manipulate by things, you can actually.
Well, for me, it goes back to the tribes again, and it being a bit like armour. So there's certain days where you wear certain things if you're feeling in a slightly offensive mood, and sometimes you're kind of in an assimilation mood, so depending on the meetings that you're going to or things that it will convey. When I spend time in Tokyo, I feel carte blanche to be myself, and there aren't any preconceptions, where when I take my kids to school, I'm the one who most people stare at because I'm the odd one out. But so you do kind of dress and work accordingly to your environment, and I do, in terms of how I want to project and how I deal with that on a daily basis.
But I think so much of that's linked to confidence. You're clearly a confident man, H, right?
Or really nervous.
But I think, millions and millions of men don't have that confidence or that kind of desire to express.
What do they do?
They just buy the same brands and the same clothes and stick to the same stuff that they've worn for years, because where do they, and I know I'm setting myself up because this is my business, but I'm doing it because I think it's an opportunity, and it's worthy. Is that, where do you go for that? Well, you're not going to go and sit in a personal shopping suite and drink coffee and talk about your wall. That's terrifying. But where do you go for that? You go on social media and you're bombarded. It's overwhelming. So who do you talk to? Who do you go, look, what are the rules? Do I wear my jeans shorter? Do I wear that colour? Do I layer? Is that good for me? Like, there's a code, and I think I don't think it's accessible for a lot of guys.
Do you not think it's a British thing?
What, are we dressed
Well,
badly?
I mean, the question would be then, is there a country, is there a set of men who...
No,
sorry, I'm jumping into... But I was just thinking, there's that kind of European, Italian, kind of French bourgeois style, which I hate. I'll go on record as hating because it's so kind of high-bound, and I think the British thing of not necessarily knowing what the rules are is a healthy thing. I think, overall, because it leads you to new and interesting places.
Completely, but I also think that
Sorry, I wasn't actually...
No, it's fine. I think that when you are in, say, whether it is in Asia, men have had bags for years. But here, over in the UK, 5 years ago, this whole thing about man bag, mulch, clutch, and and this whole thing that men are carrying bags, and it's like, is it a bit too feminine to carry bags? And I just think, in terms of how we approach dress, in terms of culturally, I just think there's other cultures around who don't necessarily have the same mores or constraints that we have or have had, like, en masse in this country.
I think what's happened in the UK is that, we invented the suit, right? The suit was the backbone of the menswear industry, and it was born here. So I think as soon as that started to relax and you didn't have to wear a suit for work, or there's more creative industries where that's not necessary and you don't have to wear it to go to a club now or a social occasion, as soon as that uniform or armour was taken away, people just went, what the hell do I do? And I think it opens up really lots of interesting opportunities, but I think it took away a safety net.
I guess as well, there's a kind of subtle association with success, isn't there? So it used to be that all successful men you could think of were very nicely turned out in a suit. And now, when you think of successful, famous men, there's much more, going back to what we were saying, there's much more sportswear. And so then, those associations fade away and it opens it up a bit more.
Wait, so actually, it's a really interesting question. Who are the male icons right now, genuinely?
Well, my huge bugbear is when you see those best dressed lists in GQ, it is just like 85-90% actors in suits they've been given on red carpets, which is nothing to do with the way that men dress, I don't think, and it's irrelevant to most men. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear who you think are like well-dressed men who are the sort of style icons of our age.
Thank you. Otherwise, I looked over here.
Only you.
I think you're looking at me because
Everyone
I was one
else
of them. So if I'm talking as a business, if we just talk about style icons that drive business, would be Beckham and Kanye. I mean, in recent times, no two individuals have actually converted into commercial success. If you look at what they're wearing and the way they've followed it, it's tricky. I mean, you could put Eddie Redmayne on there at the moment. You could put Michael Fassbender on there. But as I touched on earlier, I think there's still throwbacks. It's still a red carpet elegance. It's that movie star. It's that Hollywood glamour. And so, who's doing it creatively? I don't know. As an industry favourite, I've got huge respect for Tom Brown. I think Tom Brown genuinely changed proportions and shapes and did something. And for those of you not super familiar, he was the first person to really show really short trousers, cropped, shrunken silhouettes, and when men were wearing everything kind of oversized. And it was the first time a fashion designer, his stuff was almost too extreme and fitted too well. But, men sort of went, okay, I can wear a shorter jacket, I can wear stuff that fits, and not be scared of that. But he's a designer. I'll have a think. I'll pass it on and come back to you.
I mean, I'd have to go, as I said before, I'd have to go with the sort of Kanye, A$AP Rocky thing, in terms of, if we're talking absolutely right at this minute, in terms of icons, to use that term, who have a style that's not about looking back, that's not about reflecting heritage, but actually is about reflecting this quite interesting, sort of broken up, social mediated world that we live in right now, where you can take influence from all different parts of the world, you can take influence from different genders, and I think they probably do quite a good job of talking about a complex time for male identity and expressing that in ways that are actually quite exciting and formally quite radical.
Adnan?
I definitely, what I wanted to say, they both have said it, so I have nothing much to say, but I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Harris?
For me, someone like Mos Def or Yassine Bey, is known, and I still look at someone like David Bowie, who isn't our contemporary, but he's still, for me, someone who I would still, I would always reference someone like that as,
Bowie. It's interesting because actually
Bowie's a rude boy, right?
Yeah, well,
exactly.
It's true. In
but
the attitude, for sure.
Bowie doesn't fall into the sort of classic kind of Hollywood sort of lineage and so on, but he's really interesting because actually, in terms of freeing up, actually probably more than one generation of men to think about identity. I think he's an interesting figure, yeah.
And touched on the sort of agenda
that's
aesthetic that's coming through now. I mean, interestingly, because Harris is being humble, I'd say recently, in terms of pictures of modern day style icons, I thought Return of the Rudeboy was quite a powerful presentation of how young guys can dress now, with attention to detail. It was a serious presentation.
Thank you. Actually, there's for those who don't know, there's the face who was of the Rudeboy last year was Sam Lambert of Art Comes First. Art Comes First are a tailoring collective who have been seen on men's style blogs for the past 5 or 6 years, and they have pretty much defined and set the trends that probably 80% of the fashion houses around the world, even though they don't get credit for it, but they kind of have defined what it is to kind of reappropriate tailoring and sartorialism. So Art Comes First would probably be really high on my list in terms of male icons in the 21st century.
I just want to ask you all, what is the difference, if you think there is one, between style and fashion? Anyone can start.
Fashion, you can buy. Style, you can't buy. Style, what you play around with fashion.
It's a good answer. Set the bar high. I like it, guys.
Yeah. It's about, completely agree. It's about, it's about the personal and the personally defined, and perhaps a kind of community of expression versus, a kind of consumer-based notion of it. Or that's how we like to imagine it anyway, Like, now, actually, that's an interesting question. I was going to say every man aspires to be stylish. I wonder if that's true. As opposed to being merely fashionable. I wonder if that's true or not, though.
I don't think they necessarily know the difference. I don't think enough people know the difference between what it is to be fashionable and what it is to be stylish, because, as I said before, in terms of what we are fed daily, in terms of how we have to work things out. But for me, it comes down to confidence, because there's certain people that I know, like the James Deans, could wear a T-shirt and a pair of chinos and look immaculate, but and other people could have all the right ingredients and so forth and still can't do it. So there's a certain kind of self-assuredness for me. Is that sense of like, and going back to what Terry said, it's kind of reaching that point where you know what suits you, and then you're able just to wear that, and then therefore you're not actually having to flip or worry if you know that navy works and you know that certain shoes work or certain things. It's knowing yourself, really, for me, is style, and being able just to project that regardless of whatever you wear.
Yeah, and I think confidence is a key word. I think it's confidence and taste, and that taste doesn't have to be market taste or your peers' taste or industry taste, but it's just, it's kind of open to interpretation, but it should be your taste, right? It should be what you feel good in. When you step out the door and you're, whatever that occasion is, whether it's social, whether it's a date, whether it's business, whatever it is, it's kind of, I guess it's dressing for the right occasion. I think that's style.
Okay, that is all we got time for, and obviously, I'm wearing a leotard. No one knows, but I feel good. That's our time. Hopefully, you've taken away some insights into the relationship between men and fashion. Please join me in thanking our fabulous panel: Harris Elliott, Adnan Ansari, Ekow Eshun, and Terry Betts. And enjoy the rest of the Being a Man Festival. Cheers.